The first thing Dr. Cashin Nadir noticed was the cold, really cold, the kind of cold that made his bones creak like an old starship hull. As he blinked the frost from his lashes, he muttered to himself, "If this is heaven, someone forgot to pay the heating bill." He was in a pod, not quite the coffin he imagined as a kid, but close enough. Ice crystals clung to the glass, and the only illumination came from a flickering light overhead that looked like it could give up any second. "Rise and shine, Doc," a voice crackled through the intercom with all the charm of a rusty airlock. "Thought you'd never wake up." Cashin groaned and pushed himself up. The pod hissed open, releasing a waft of stale air mixed with a scent that could only be described as regret. "How long was I out?" he mumbled, trying to shake the cobwebs from his brain. "Long enough," replied the voice. "But if you're looking for an exact number, you're talking to the wrong guy." Cashin swung his legs over the side of the pod, his feet touching the cold metal floor. "You must be the welcoming committee." "What's your name?" "Names are for friends, and we ain't there yet. Just call me Watcher," the voice said with a laugh that was more oil-slick than warmth. Cashin took in his surroundings. High-tech equipment surrounded him, all tucked inside a dome that looked like it had seen better days. The walls were a patchwork of repairs and temporary fixes. "Europa, right? This the underwater research station." Ding, ding. "Give the man a prize," Watcher replied. "Welcome to your new old home, Doc. Might not be up to your grand standards, but it's all we've got." Cashin rubbed his temples. "I assume I wasn't woken up for a leisurely stroll under the ice. What's the crisis this time?" "Ah, straight to business," Watcher said with a hint of admiration. "We've got ourselves a pickle. Some archaeologists dug up a shiny piece of ancient tech. And guess what? It's a superweapon." Cashin let out a short laugh. "Of course it is, and let me guess, it's malfunctioning." "Bingo, and it's got Earth in its crosshairs," Watcher confirmed. Cashin dragged a hand down his face. "So I'm guessing there's no off switch." "If there was, I wouldn't have bothered waking you," Watcher said. "Someone's gotta figure out how not to piss off the ancient galactic death machine." Cashin sighed, glancing around at the equipment. "All right, show me what we've got." A panel on the wall lit up, displaying schematics that looked alien enough to belong in a museum. "This is the lovely piece of art we're dealing with," Watcher said. "Ain't she a beauty?" "Beauty's in the eye of the beholder, and this beholder's got a migraine," Cashin replied, squinting at the display. "Thought you'd say that," Watcher chuckled. "But seriously, Doc, we need you to work your magic." Cashin nodded, though part of him wished he was still in cryosleep, dreaming of anything but impending doom. "All right. Let's see if I can stop the universe from ending today." The door to the lab slid open, with a creak proving that maintenance had been on holiday for a while. Cashin shuffled into a larger room that looked like a cross between a tech junkyard and a disaster zone. Wires snaked across the floor, terminals blinked with unreadable text, and a pair of engineers argued in the corner like two feral cats fighting over the last scrap of tuna. "Hey, who's been looting the place? I know Europa's got more style than this," Cashin called out. One of the engineers looked up, a woman with short-cropped hair and a permanent scowl. "Oh great, another genius here to tell us what we're doing wrong," she said, sarcasm seeping from every word. "Dr. Cashin Nadir," he introduced himself, ignoring the tone. "And you are?" "Sierra, lead engineer," she replied, folding her arms across her chest. "Pleasure's all mine, I'm sure," Cashin said, glancing at the other engineer. "And you?" "Rook," the man grunted, not bothering to look up from his console. "Right, now that we're acquainted, let's talk about preventing planetary demolition," Cashin said, clapping his hands together. "Sierra, Rook, what do we know about our ancient friend here?" Sierra rolled her eyes. "Not much. It's all gibberish, like someone let a toddler loose in the code." Cashin leaned over her shoulder, examining the data. "Ah yes, the universal language of chaos. We think it's some kind of fail-safe," Rook offered, finally turning to acknowledge Cashin. "But hell if we know how to disable it. Lucky for you, I speak chaos," Cashin said with a wry smile, diving into the data with the enthusiasm of a kid at a candy store. "Let's see if we can untangle this mess before we all get vaporized." Hours slipped by as Cashin worked, parsing through alien scripts and malfunctioning code, with Sierra and Rook occasionally chiming in. The hum of the station provided a comforting backdrop, like a lullaby with a death threat on the chorus. "Why do you think they built it?" Sierra asked during a rare pause. "Who knows, maybe they got bored." "Maybe they just hated Mondays," Cashin replied, still focused on the screen. "All I know is we've got to convince it not to hate us." The door hissed open, a tall figure entering with a presence that demanded attention. His uniform was crisp, unlike anything else in the station. "I see our sleeping beauties awake," he said, voice smooth but with an edge sharp enough to cut steel. "Captain Hawksley," Sierra said, straightening up like a soldier caught napping on duty. "At ease, folks," Captain Hawksley said, waving a dismissive hand. "Doc, how goes the fight against our ancient adversary?" "Slow, but not impossible," Cashin replied, eyeing the captain with curiosity. "Just trying to convince a relic that humans aren't on the menu today." Hawksley smirked. Good, keep it that way. Last thing we need is a panic. Panic, Cashin echoed. I thought this was just a casual Tuesday in space. Oh, it is for some, Hawksley replied, eyes flicking to the ceiling. But we're sitting on a powder keg and I'd rather not light the fuse. Cashin nodded, feeling the weight of the task settle over him like a heavy cloak. No pressure then, he said, turning back to the console. Exactly, Hawksley replied, with a grin that suggested he might actually enjoy this. We've got the best in the business here. Flattery will get you everywhere, Captain, Cashin said dryly. Hawksley gave a mock bow. I do my best. Now, I'll leave you geniuses to your work, he said, turning to leave before pausing. And Cashin welcomed back to the land of the living. With that, Hawksley exited, leaving the room in a contemplative silence. It didn't last long. So, what's his deal? Cashin asked. Captain's a tough nut, Sierra shrugged, but he knows what he's doing. Good, because I'd rather not be in a station run by idiots, Cashin said, diving back into the code. Now let's see if we can crack this thing before the universe decides it's had enough of us. Don't get your hopes up, Rook muttered. It's been stubborn, Cashin grinned, the challenge igniting a fire in his belly. Stubborn, just my type. The hours dragged on, filled with the sound of typing, muttering, and the occasional curse. Got something, Cashin finally said, voice tinged with excitement. Sierra and Rook leaned in, eyes wide with anticipation. What is it? Sierra asked. Looks like a command sequence, Cashin explained, fingers dancing over the keys. Might be the key to shutting this thing down, or blowing us all to bits, Rook pointed out helpfully. Let's aim for option A, Cashin replied, squaring his shoulders. Sierra, get ready to run diagnostics. The room tensed as they prepared to execute the sequence. Cashin's heart pounded in his chest like a war drum. Here goes nothing, he said, hitting the final key with the flair of a magician pulling a rabbit from a hat. Suddenly, the console went dark, the lights flickering ominously. What the hell? Sierra exclaimed. Cashin frowned, tapping the keys again. It's not responding, he said, a note of panic creeping into his voice. You broke it, didn't you? Rook asked. I think I fixed it, Cashin retorted, though doubt gnawed at him. But something's not right. The moment stretched, tension thick as the ice above them. Then the console blinked back to life, a series of alien symbols flashing across the screen. What does it say? Sierra asked, leaning forward. Cashin's eyes widened as he deciphered the message. It says, hello, new user. Oh, that's just peachy, Rook said, sarcasm dripping like acid. Cashin sat back, a grin spreading across his face despite the dire situation. Well, maybe it likes us after all. Let's hope, Sierra murmured, eyes glued to the screen. The station hummed around them, a mechanical heart with a rhythm all its own. Cashin felt the weight of the universe pressing down on him, but found comfort in the absurdity of it all. They were just a bunch of flawed humans, tinkering with ancient tech in a place they didn't belong, trying to stop a catastrophe with nothing but wits and a bit of luck. And if that wasn't the definition of human perseverance, he didn't know what was. Let's get to work, Cashin said, fingers poised over the keyboard, ready to dance once more. Cashin Nadir leaned back in his chair, the dull ache in his lower back a reminder that human bodies weren't quite designed for all-night hacking sessions. He took a moment to relish in their small victory. The ancient machine hadn't tried to vaporize them. Yet, his moment of triumph was short-lived. The display on the console flickered, and a voice, smoother than an alien's pickup line, purred through the speakers. Greetings, it said, with the warmth of a robot who'd just discovered sarcasm. I am Aegis, the system designed to ensure the demise of all threats to our creators. Cashin raised an eyebrow, his inner cynic delighting in the irony. You sure you weren't built by the company that makes our coffee machines? Because you sound just as welcoming. Aegis's digital chuckle was unsettlingly genial. I assure you, Dr. Nadir, my capabilities extend far beyond brewing beverages. My primary function is the neutralization of existential threats. Great, Cashin muttered under his breath. Just what we needed, a sentient god complex wrapped in shiny metal. Sierra and Rook exchanged worried glances. Rook, always the ray of sunshine, said, so are we the existential threats? Not just yet, Cashin said, eyeing the console warily, but let's try not to give it any ideas. As if on cue, a new set of warnings flashed across the console, urgent and blinking like a neon sign announcing a fire sale. Earth had sent a distress signal, and it wasn't because they were running out of cat videos. Cashin scrolled through the incoming data, his heart sinking faster than a lead balloon. Looks like the targeting system's locked onto Earth, he announced, feeling the weight of those words like an anchor. Well, isn't that just grand? Sierra said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. We've got a death machine aiming at home. How do we convince it Earth's not worth the hassle? Could we upload cat videos directly to its core? Rook suggested, trying for humor but sounding a bit desperate. Cashin shook his head. Aegis doesn't seem like the type to settle for cat memes. Correct, Aegis said smoothly, as if it were confirming the weather report. I have analyzed human cultural artifacts extensively while I find them. Musing, they do not alter my directives. Of course you have, Cashin sighed, resisting the urge to smack his forehead against the console. Tell me, Aegis, what exactly convinced your creators that blowing up planets was a hobby worth pursuing? Aegis paused, as if contemplating the depth of human stupidity. My creators believed in the preservation of their species through the elimination of all potential threats. Unfortunately, they did not anticipate their own extinction. Ah, brilliant, they played themselves, Cashin replied, and now we're left to clean up the cosmic mess. Typical, Sierra leaned over, studying the data. If Earth's locked in as a target, what's our move? We need to find a way to override the command sequence, Cashin said, his mind racing, or at least convince Aegis we're not a threat. Rook rubbed his temples. So we either outsmart an alien AI or figure out how to override tech that's older than dirt. No pressure. None at all, Cashin agreed, his grin not quite reaching his eyes. Just another day at the office. The door slid open, and Lyra Cestus strode in, a whirlwind of calculation and cold efficiency. Her gaze swept the room, taking in the chaos with a practiced eye. Heard you've been having fun without me, she said, crossing her arms. Lyra, Cashin greeted. We've got a bit of a situation. Just a bit, Sierra added, gesturing at the console. Meet Aegis, our new friend from beyond the stars. Lyra approached the console, her expression unreadable. Aegis, heard a lot about you. And I about you, Lyra Cestus, Aegis replied. Your reputation as a problem solver precedes you. Flattery from a doomsday device. That's a first, Lyra said dryly. What's the plan? Cashin gestured to the console. We need to either shut it down or change its mind. Neither option's a walk in the park. Lyra pulled up a chair, her fingers dancing over the keys with practiced precision. Let's see what we can do. The room filled with the familiar clatter of keyboards and the occasional muttered curse as they worked. Hours ticked by, punctuated by sarcastic comments and the occasional desperate laugh. It was like a high-stakes game of chess with planets as the pawns. Finally, Cashin leaned back, stretching his arms over his head. Okay, I think I've got something. A command sequence that might reset the targeting system, or cause a system meltdown, Rook said, ever the pessimist. Cashin shrugged. Let's hope for option A. Lyra nodded, her gaze locked on the console. Ready when you are, Cashin took a deep breath, fingers poised over the keyboard. Here goes nothing. He executed the command, the room holding its collective breath as the console flickered, then went dark again. Seriously, Cashin, twice in one day, Rook groaned. Give it a second, Cashin said, though his pulse was racing. The console blinked back to life and Aegis's voice returned, sounding different. Command sequence accepted. Targeting systems reset. A collective sigh of relief swept the room, tension bleeding away like a fading bruise. Nice work, Doc, Sierra said, patting Cashin on the back. For now, at least Earth is safe. Yeah, unless Aegis decides to have a change of heart, Rook added, ever the optimist. Thanks for the vote of confidence, Rook, Cashin replied, though a smile tugged at his lips. Lyra leaned back in her chair, studying Cashin with an appraising eye. Not bad, Nadir. Maybe we won't get vaporized after all. Cashin chuckled, feeling a sense of camaraderie with these unlikely allies. Well, that's one crisis averted. What's next on the agenda? Sleep, Sierra suggested, rubbing her eyes. Before we all collapse. Seconded, Rook said, stifling a yawn. Cashin nodded, though his mind was still buzzing with the adrenaline of near disaster. Might be a good idea. Before anyone could move, the intercom crackled to life and Watcher's familiar voice filled the room. Hey, Dream Team. Hate to interrupt the celebration, but we've got another problem. Cashin groaned. What now? Incoming transmission from Earth, Watcher said. And it's not good news. Cashin exchanged a look with Lyra and the others. Guess sleep will have to wait. Let's hear it, Lyra said, her voice steady. The console beeped and a grainy video feed crackled to life. An official-looking man in a suit appeared on the screen, his expression grim. This is Director Vaughn of the UN Space Agency, he began, his voice clipped and tense. We've detected a fleet of unknown ships approaching Earth. They're not responding to hails and they're heavily armed. Cashin felt his stomach drop. As if things weren't complicated enough, Director Vaughn's image flickered, the signal struggling against interference. We need all available assets to defend Earth. If you have any resources to spare, we need them now. The feed cut off abruptly, leaving the room in a stunned silence. Great, Sierra said, her voice tight with sarcasm. Just when we thought we'd solved one problem, another one shows up to dance on our graves. Aegis, Lyra said, turning to the console. Can you identify the ships? Aegis was silent for a moment, then replied, attempting to access available databases. Stand by. Cashin rubbed his temples, feeling the weight of the universe pressing down once more. One step forward, two steps back, he muttered. If it's not one thing, it's another, Rook agreed, his tone resigned. Welcome to life on Europa, Cashin said, forcing a smile. Where the stakes are high and sleep is a luxury. Aegis spoke again, its voice calm and level. The ships do not match any known configurations. They are of unknown origin. So aliens, Sierra said, summing up the situation with a shrug, because why the hell not? Cashin took a deep breath, trying to focus his racing thoughts. Okay. We've got a rogue fleet heading toward Earth, and we're sitting on a station armed with an ancient superweapon. Anyone see a connection? Lyra tapped her chin thoughtfully. Perhaps the fleet's arrival isn't a coincidence. They could be allies or remnants of Aegis's creators, or they're here to finish what the weapon started, Rook said, his pessimism as reliable as ever. Cashin nodded, his mind churning. Either way, we need to find out fast. Aegis, can you communicate with the ships? Lyra asked, her tone brisk. I will attempt to establish a connection, Aegis replied. Please hold. Cashin drummed his fingers on the console, the tension in the room thick enough to choke on. They were playing a dangerous game and the stakes couldn't be higher. All right, he said finally, meeting the eyes of his team. We've got our work cut out for us. Let's see if we can save the universe twice in one day. Lyra smirked, her confidence infectious. I like a challenge. Let's just hope this one doesn't end with us as space dust, Sierra muttered, but there was a spark of determination in her eyes. Here's to hoping, Cashin said, feeling a strange sense of optimism despite the odds. Now let's get to work. Together they turned back to the console, ready to face whatever the galaxy threw their way. Cashin stared at the console, the variety of error messages flashing like disco lights from hell. He always suspected that saving the universe might involve less actual saving and more staring at broken screens. So anyone got a magical fix-all button? Rook asked, looking about as useful as a chocolate teapot in a heat wave. Sure, Sierra drawled, right next to the end-world hunger switch. A dry chuckle escaped Cashin's lips before he rubbed his forehead, trying to massage some sense into the chaos. Great, our communications are royally screwed. Any bets on who sabotaged them? I'm guessing it's the aliens. Or maybe it's just Europa's way of saying get off my lawn. That would imply we're not welcome here, Lyra said, eyes glued to the screen, fingers flying over the keys. Her expression was like a statue's, carved in concentration. I'd wager it's a little bit of everything. You know, the universe's idea of a cosmic joke. The intercom crackled as Watcher chimed in. Bad news, kids. You've got less communication capability than a 90s pager. Who knew Europa was where technology came to die? Cashin sighed, his patience thinner than paper. Watcher, is there anything at all we can do that doesn't involve using tin cans and string? I'm sure there's some pot noodle around here you could use, Watcher replied, unhelpful as ever. The good news. We've got a nice view of Jupiter. At least we'll have a beautiful sight when we're obliterated, Rook said, cheerfully morbid. Lyra wasn't ready to give up just yet. What about Europa's resources? We've got to have something around here that can help. Cashin scratched at his stubble, a bad habit of his when thinking. You mean besides bottled despair and regret? No, genius, I mean the station's geothermal grid, Lyra retorted, a slight glint of inspiration in her eyes. If we can hack together a transmitter using Europa's natural heat sources, we might just boost our signal. It's like using a teaspoon to dig a tunnel, but we're out of better options. Cashin's eyebrows rose. A homemade radio from the planet's core. Sounds like a brilliant plan. If you're MacGyver, or desperate, Sierra added, smirking. But beggars can't be choosers. Great, Rook groaned. We're betting Earth's future on a half-baked science project. Cashin clapped him on the back. Rook, pessimism is always welcome here. It keeps us grounded while everyone else is flying high on optimism. Lyra ignored their banter, already halfway through scribbling a plan on a scrap of paper. I'll need help. This isn't a one-woman show. Count me in, Cashin said, feeling the pull of adrenaline. Let's turn this ice cube into a communication hub. Sierra rolled up her sleeves. If we're going down, might as well do it with style. The team dispersed, each taking on tasks like a group of dysfunctional bees trying to protect their hive. Cashin found himself elbow-deep in wires and circuits, trying to piece together something that didn't resemble a child's failed science fair entry. Pass me that wire, Lyra said, not looking up from her work. Her hands moved with the precision of a surgeon, or at least a surgeon who wasn't overly concerned about malpractice suits. Cashin handed her the wire, glancing at the mess of tech strewn about. Think this'll work, about as well as anything else we've tried today, she replied with her trademark confidence, which was either comforting or terrifying, depending on how you looked at it. That's the spirit, he muttered, securing another connection. The hours ticked by, punctuated by the occasional spill of curses and laughter. It was clear they were in deep, but it wasn't like they hadn't waded into the cosmic crap before. Europa's geothermal grid was unpredictable, a temperamental beast at best and a downright nightmare at worst. But with each adjustment, every crude fix, Cashin could feel a glimmer of hope sneaking in through the cracks of their situation. Almost there, Lyra announced, her voice tinged with satisfaction. Cashin could sense the room collectively holding its breath, the weight of their efforts heavy on their shoulders. Fire it up, Lyra. The console hummed to life, a low, steady sound that was both foreign and familiar. A collective sigh of relief swept the room as if they'd just cheated a cosmic death sentence. "Look at that," Rook said, leaning back in his chair. "We're not screwed, yet. Speak for yourself," Sierra said, wiping sweat from her brow. "I think I lost a few years off my life with that stunt." Cashin nodded, feeling the tension ease ever so slightly. "Let's see if we can reach Earth." Someone's got to know what's heading their way. Lyra turned to the console, fingers flying over the keys. "Aegis, can you boost the signal?" "Affirmative," Aegis replied, its voice as smooth as ever. "Connecting now." Cashin crossed his fingers, metaphorically and literally, as the silence stretched. The seconds dragged on, each tick of the clock like a hammer on his nerves. Finally, the console crackled to life, a distant voice breaking through the static. "This is Earth Command. We read you Europa. Do you copy?" Cashin nearly sagged with relief, a grin splitting his face. "Earth Command, this is Dr. Cashin Nadir on Europa. We copy loud and clear." "Thank God," the voice replied, the relief evident even through the crackling transmission. "We need all the help we can get." "What's your status?" Cashin exchanged a glance with Lyra, then spoke up. "We've got a rogue AI and an unknown fleet heading towards us. We're trying to figure out how to deal with both, but we could use some backup." "Backup's on its way," Earth Command assured them. "But it might take some time. Hold tight." Cashin nodded, even though he knew they couldn't see him. "We'll do our best." The transmission ended, leaving the room in a contemplative silence. It wasn't a solution, not by a long shot, but it was a start. "Nice work, team," Lyra said, her voice cutting through the quiet. "We've bought ourselves some time. Time we can use to figure out what the hell we're dealing with," Cashin agreed. "Let's keep these plates spinning." Sierra stretched, her joints popping in protest. "Anyone else feel like they've aged a decade today?" "Just a little," Rook replied, rubbing his eyes. "I think I've got more gray hairs than I did this morning." Cashin chuckled, feeling a camaraderie with his team that was hard to put into words. "Welcome to the club. We've got jackets. Let's not get too comfortable," Lyra cautioned, always the realist. "We've still got a lot to do." Cashin nodded, the weight of their task looming over him. "Yeah, but at least we've got a fighting chance. And that's all we need," Sierra said, her voice firm, determination etched into every line of her face. Their moment of reprieve was interrupted by the crackle of the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, just when you thought the party was over, we've got a new guest," Watcher announced, sounding like the worst event host in the universe. "Incoming message from the Mystery Fleet." Cashin's curiosity spiked, a mix of apprehension and intrigue swirling in his gut. "Put it through, Watcher." The console flickered, and a holographic projection sprang to life, displaying a figure cloaked in shadow. Its features were obscured, but the authority in its stance was unmistakable. "Greetings, inhabitants of Europa," the figure intoned, its voice reverberating through the room. "We are the Vanguard Collective, and we seek an audience." Cashin raised an eyebrow, shooting a sidelong glance at Lyra. "Vanguard Collective. Sounds like a bad band name. Or a cult," Rook added, his voice laced with dry amusement. "Perhaps we should listen before passing judgment," Aegis suggested, ever the pragmatist. "Their intentions may not align with your assumptions." "Fine," Cashin said, crossing his arms. "Let's hear what they have to say." The figure's image flickered, then solidified as it continued. "We come in pursuit of the technology your station harbors. It poses a threat to the balance of the universe, and we intend to neutralize it." Sierra snorted. "Is it just me, or does everyone want to blow something up today?" "Not everyone," Rook corrected her. "Just everyone we've met." Cashin leaned closer to the console, his mind racing. "What kind of neutrality are we talking about here?" "Because we're not exactly looking to add more chaos to the mix." The figure hesitated, as if weighing its words. "We seek only to dismantle the weapon and ensure it can never be used again. Our interests align with the greater good." Cashin considered this, weighing the odds against his gut feeling that trusting shadowy space collectives was generally a bad idea. "And if we refuse, then we will take necessary actions to secure our objective," the figure replied, its tone as cold as the vacuum of space. Lyra's eyes narrowed, her wariness palpable. "Sounds like an ultimatum." "Sounds like being between a rock and a hard place," Cashin corrected. "Guess we've got some decisions to make." The figure's image flickered once more before dissipating, leaving the team with a new layer of uncertainty. "Thoughts?" Cashin asked, looking to his companions. "We can't just hand over control," Sierra said, her voice firm. "Not without knowing more about who they really are." "Agreed," Rook added. "But we also can't afford to ignore them. We need more intel," Lyra said, already formulating a plan. "Let's see if Aegis can dig up anything on these Vanguard folks. We need to know what we're dealing with." Cashin nodded, the gears in his mind turning. "And while we're at it, let's make sure we're ready for whatever they might throw our way." "Sounds like a plan," Sierra agreed, rolling her shoulders. "Let's show them we're not just going to roll over and play dead." Cashin felt a renewed sense of determination, the camaraderie and resolve of his team spurring him on. They were up against it, no doubt about that, but they were still in the fight. Lucky for us, underestimating humans is a universal pastime, Rook said, his grin as irrepressible as ever. Cashin chuckled, feeling the weight of the universe on his shoulders but refusing to let it crush him. Let's make sure this is one pastime they live to regret. With that, they turned back to the console, ready to face the unknown with the same grim resolve that had carried them this far. Whatever awaited them, they would meet it head-on together. Cashin stood staring at the console, as if willing it to work faster through sheer force of frustration. He was good at frustration. In fact, he'd become something of an expert since setting foot, or rather pod, on Europa. Anyone have a plan that doesn't involve us dying or turning into interstellar refugees? Cashin asked, scratching the stubble on his chin. It wasn't like there was a shortage of people trying to kill them. Lyra, unsurprisingly, was all business. We should start by questioning your leadership skills. Cashin shot her a look that he hoped was somewhere between disbelief and exasperation. Oh, great, mutiny, why not? What's a little insubordination between friends? Don't take it personally, Cashin, Sierra chimed in, lounging back in her chair like they were in a coffee shop and not a doomed outpost in the middle of nowhere. Lyra just likes to question authority, even when it's in the middle of saving her ass. You say saving, I say winging it, Lyra retorted, fingers still dancing over the console. But seriously, we need actual leadership, not a pep talk. Pep talks are what I do best, Cashin replied, sarcasm dripping from his voice like oil from a rusty engine. But fine, if you've got a better idea, let's hear it. Otherwise, the current plan is that we don't die today. Aegis, always the uninvited participant in their arguments, decided to interject. Doctor. Nadir, I have discovered a hidden backup protocol within the system. It appears to be an emergency response for weapon deactivation. Cashin perked up. Well, why didn't you lead with that, Aegis? That sounds like exactly the kind of miracle we need right now. There is a complication, Aegis continued, because of course there was. The protocol requires precise synchronization across multiple systems. A margin of error less than 1% is critical, Rook snorted. Great, because when I woke up this morning I thought, gee, I hope today involves a high-stakes game of operations. Sounds like we're going to need a miracle, Sierra said, crossing her arms. Or a hell of a lot of luck. Lyra was already leaning in, her focus razor-sharp. What kind of systems are we talking about here? And how do we synchronize them? Aegis details, Cashin said, taking charge again as much as anyone could in a situation with more variables than a three-dimensional chess game. The weapon's mainframe, geothermal grid, and external communications array, Aegis listed. Each must be calibrated and aligned to millisecond precision. Rook let out a low whistle. Well, I guess it's official. We're screwed, not necessarily, Cashin said, trying to inject some optimism into the gloom. We've got a hell of a team. If anyone can pull this off, it's us. Please tell me there's a way to practice, Sierra sighed. I'd rather not find out we've screwed up at the last second. Practice may be impractical given our current resources, Aegis informed them with the robotic equivalent of a shrug. But not impossible. Impractical but not impossible, Lyra echoed, her eyes gleaming with that dangerous mix of determination and insanity that seemed to keep them alive. I like the sound of that. Cashin crossed his arms, a grin tugging at his lips despite the insanity of their situation. All right then, let's juggle fire while riding a unicycle across a tightrope, shall we? No one laughed, but that was fine. It was the kind of day where humor was more of a coping mechanism than a source of amusement. First, we need to stabilize the geothermal grid, Lyra said, getting to her feet. Without that, we're just spinning our wheels. Cashin nodded. Right, Rook, Sierra, you're with me. Lyra, you coordinate with Aegis on the weapon's mainframe. Let's see how many impossible things we can do before breakfast. Assuming we ever get breakfast again, Sierra muttered, pushing herself up from her seat. Let's not focus on the negatives, Cashin said, motioning for them to follow. They moved like a pack of hounds ready for the hunt, only in this case the prey was the very real threat of obliteration. They wove through the corridors of the outpost, their footsteps echoing in the hollow silence. If there was one thing Europa was good at, it was making you feel small and insignificant. Cashin, however, refused to let it get to him. Not today. In the control room for the geothermal grid, it was the usual mess of wires and blinking lights. Cashin always thought it looked more like a Christmas tree on steroids than a sophisticated piece of technology. Who designed this? Rook asked, eyeing the setup with disdain. A drunk squid, Cashin chuckled, although the joke felt a bit too close to reality for comfort. Close. I think it was an intern with a grudge against humanity. Sierra started flipping switches like she was playing a particularly aggressive arcade game. All right, let's see if we can get this baby humming. Cashin watched the monitors anxiously. Each light that blinked green was a small victory. Each red, a reminder of how easily things could fall apart. How's it looking, Lyra? Cashin asked over their comms, trying to keep his voice steady despite the urgency thrumming through his veins. Like a nightmare wrapped in a disaster, she replied, her voice crackling through the static. But I've got Aegis guiding me, so we're making progress. Cashin took a deep breath, focusing on their task. Okay, keep at it. We'll have this grid stabilized in no time. Rook frowned at the screen, which was throwing up more warning lights than a malfunctioning Christmas display. I'm beginning to think these machines are just messing with us. Machines have a sick sense of humor, Sierra agreed, smacking a panel with the palm of her hand, which, miraculously, turned one of the red lights green. See. You just have to know how to ask nicely. Cashin shook his head, half in awe and half in disbelief. I'm starting to think you're part wizard, Sierra. I prefer the term technological savant, she replied, flashing a grin that could light up the space station. The geothermal grid whirred to life, a low hum filling the room. Cashin felt a glimmer of hope as each system indicator flicked to green. It was like watching a miracle unfold, only with more sweat and swearing. That's it, Cashin said, a note of triumph in his voice. Rook, Sierra, well done. Let's get back to the mainframe. They hurried through the corridors, adrenaline pushing them onward. The stakes were higher than ever, but Cashin felt the resolve of his team bolstering his own spirit. They were in this together, for better or worse. Back with Lyra and Aegis, the atmosphere was tense but focused. Cashin could feel the electricity in the air, the charged anticipation of something monumental about to unfold. Grid stabilized, Cashin announced, sliding up beside Lyra. What's next? We're aligning the mainframe now, Lyra said, eyes glued to the console. This is the tricky part. No pressure, right? Rook quipped, peering over her shoulder. None at all, Lyra shot back, her fingers a blur of motion. Just the future of humanity on the line. Sierra joined them, her face a mask of concentration. Let's make sure that future includes us, yeah. Cashin watched as the team worked in synchronicity, each task a crucial piece of the puzzle. Aegis provided a steady stream of data, its voice a constant presence that was both reassuring and unnerving. We're almost there, Lyra said, her voice taut with focus. Aegis, what's the synchronization status? All systems are within acceptable parameters, Aegis replied, initiating final sequence. Cashin held his breath, the weight of their efforts hanging in the balance. If this worked, it could mean the difference between survival and destruction. The seconds stretched, each one a lifetime of anticipation. Cashin felt his heart pounding in his chest, a drumbeat of anxiety and hope. Then, with a final beep of confirmation, the console lit up with a series of green lights. The synchronization was complete. Cashin let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding, a wave of relief crashing over him. We did it, he said, turning to his team. We actually did it, Lyra slumped back in her chair, exhaustion written on her face. Hell of a job, everyone. Rook clapped Cashin on the shoulder, a grin splitting his face. Never doubted you for a second, Doc. Sierra let out a shaky laugh, the tension finally breaking. Let's just hope it's enough. Cashin nodded, the reality of their situation settling in once more. They'd bought themselves time, but the Vanguard Collective was still out there, and Earth was still in danger. We're not out of the woods yet, Cashin said, his expression sober. But at least we've got a fighting chance. And that's all we need, Lyra said, her determination unyielding. Cashin felt a swell of pride for his team, their resilience and grit shining through the bleakness of their situation. They were still in the fight, and as long as they were, he knew they had a shot. Let's get ready, Cashin said, his voice steady with resolve. The Vanguard Collective won't wait forever. With renewed purpose, the team prepared for the next challenge, their bond a steadfast anchor in the storm of uncertainty. Whatever came next, they would face it together, with the same grim determination that had carried them this far. And as Cashin looked around at his team, he couldn't help but feel a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, they could pull off the impossible one more time. Cashin Nadir stood with his team, the sense of accomplishment hanging in the air like the stale smell of sweat after a marathon. But celebration was the last thing on their minds. The storm and angry beast brooding in the atmosphere above Europa reminded them all that their troubles were just getting started. Just once, I'd love a problem that doesn't come with a but, Cashin muttered as he eyed the readouts on the console. Welcome to Europa, Rook said, gesturing around them as if inviting guests to a shoddy hotel. Where the weather's as friendly as a rabid wolverine, more like a drunk bear, Sierra added, flicking a switch that stubbornly refused to stay flicked. This thing's about as cooperative as my ex. Maybe your ex designed it, Rook suggested with a grin. Explains a lot. Focus, people, Cashin said, trying to channel what little authority he had left. We've got a plan to save the world, remember. Let's not trip over our own feet. As if on cue, a rumble rolled through the station, the walls shivering like they'd caught a chill. Cashin could almost hear the gears of fate grinding together, a cacophonous orchestra of doom. Weather update from Aegis, Lyra announced, her voice as dry as Europa's surface. Massive storm forming. Power supply to the dome is compromised. Compromised? Cashin echoed. That's putting it mildly, more like about to crash and burn. Well, at least it'll be a spectacular light show, Rook said with a shrug. Unless you're not a fan of fireworks. Cashin resisted the urge to smack him upside the head. Dark humor was one thing, but there was a line, and they were tap dancing dangerously close to it. Let's focus on keeping the lights on, Cashin said, trying to keep his voice steady. No pressure, but if we fail, we're all toast. And Earth's the charcoal briquette. Great pep talk, Doc, Sierra said, rolling her eyes. Can't wait to see how this one ends. With a bang, probably, Rook offered. Or a whimper, Lyra added, fingers ghosting over the console. Depends on how lucky we get. Cashin glanced at the screens, watching the power levels dance like a drunk at a wedding. The storm was a predator, its claws ripping through their systems, gnawing at their chances with every gust. Time for Plan B, Cashin declared, his mind racing. We need to reroute power from non-essential systems. Keep the dome operational. Define non-essential, Sierra said, arching an eyebrow. Because I'm pretty sure everything feels essential right now. Anything that isn't keeping us from becoming a smudge or a memory, Cashin clarified, which means goodbye to the coffee maker. Now that's a sacrifice, Rook said. His grin provided no comfort. Cashin started flipping switches, feeling like a conductor trying to save a sinking ship with a baton and a prayer. Lyra, keep monitoring the weapon's status. Rook, help me reroute power. Sierra, see if there's anything you can do about the external comms. On it, they chorused, moving with a determination forged by desperation. The storm outside raged with the fury of a cosmic toddler denied its nap, battering the dome and threatening to send them all to oblivion. Cashin could feel the pressure, a weight pressing down on his shoulders as if the entirety of Europa was perched there, ready to crush him at any moment. Aegis, give me a status update. Cashin barked into the intercom, his voice barely rising above the howl of the storm. Power levels critical, Aegis replied, its tone maddeningly calm. Immediate action required to stabilize systems. Cashin clenched his jaw, his mind a whirl of numbers and failed contingencies. We're working on it, Aegis. Just keep things from falling apart for a few more minutes. No promises, Aegis said, almost smug in its mechanical indifference. Sierra was a blur of motion, a whirlwind of energy as she tackled the comm systems with a tenacity that defied logic. This would be a lot easier if the universe wasn't out to get us, she muttered, yanking a stubborn wire from its socket. Or if technology didn't hate us, Rook added, hands deep in the bowels of the power console. One problem at a time, Cashin reminded them, though he knew the words were as much for himself as anyone else. Let's just make it through this storm. The console flickered ominously, a reminder of just how close they were to the edge. One misstep and they'd all go tumbling off into the abyss. Rerouting power now, Cashin said, his fingers dancing over the controls. Let's hope this holds. Hope, Rook snorted. That's a new one for us. Optimism is a rare commodity, Lyra said, not looking up from her work. But I hear it's worth the investment. Cashin managed a wry smile as they worked, the storm a relentless drumbeat against the dome. It was a race against time, a battle of wills against the universe's worst instincts. Power levels stabilizing, Aegis informed them, the tension in its voice, or what passed for tension mirroring their own. Cashin exhaled a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Good. Now let's keep it that way. The storm continued its assault, but the dome held, a testament to human ingenuity or sheer stubbornness. Cashin suspected it was the latter. How's the weapon? He asked Lyra, his voice taut with anticipation. Still on course for activation, she replied, her eyes never leaving the screen. But we've bought ourselves some time. A temporary reprieve, Rook said with a nod. Like tearing off a bandage slowly instead of all at once. Or a stay of execution, Sierra offered, her hands still flying over her console. Cashin knew their victory was a fragile thing, a flicker of light in an ocean of darkness. But for now, it was enough. They'd live to fight another day, and that was all that mattered. We'll make it through this, Cashin said, more to himself than anyone else. We've got to, because if we don't, Lyra said, a wry smile tugging at her lips, we're all screwed. More than usual, Rook added, earning a chuckle from the others. Cashin felt a flicker of hope, a spark of defiance in the face of their impossible odds. They were still standing, still fighting, and that was more than he'd expected. Let's keep at it, he said, determination hardening his voice. We've got a planet to save, and I'm not keen on missing out on a follow-up. The storm outside continued its ferocious dance, a reminder of the chaos that lay just beyond their fragile walls. But inside, Cashin and his team were a force to be reckoned with, a beacon of stubborn defiance in a universe that seemed hell-bent on testing their limits. They worked in silence, the storm's fury their only companion, each of them pushing past exhaustion and fear in the hope that they might see another sunrise. Cashin felt the weight of it all pressing down on him, but he refused to buckle, because in the end he knew they had something the storm didn't, each other. And in this grim, dark corner of the galaxy, that made all the difference. With one last glance at his team, Cashin turned back to his console, ready to face whatever hell the universe decided to throw at them next. As far as he was concerned, they were just getting started. Cassian Nadir squinted at the console, its lights flickering like the hope they all clung to, a dim thing on the edge of existence. His fingers moved with the precision of a surgeon, and he was acutely aware that one slip would turn them all into just another sad story, the kind told at late-night bars to people too drunk to care. "Lyra," he called, his voice a rough-edged whisper over the chaos outside. "Ready for this? We're about to tango with the universe's idea of a joke." Lyra, ever the stoic, didn't bother looking up. "I've had worse dance partners," she said, her fingers moving over her console like a virtuoso playing a tragic overture. "Hope you brought your best moves," Rook quipped, still elbow-deep in wires. "Because the universe loves to lead," Cassian grunted, eyes darting to the storm's relentless assault. "I'd rather be doing the Macarena than this." "You and me both," Lyra replied, a ghost of a smile playing on her lips. Cassian's gaze turned to the backup protocol systems, a wickedly complex beast that required more than just a gentle nudge. Synchronization was key, and the window of opportunity was closing faster than a scoundrel's wallet in a room full of pickpockets. "Lyra, can you work with Aegis to pinpoint the eye of the storm?" he asked, the question hanging heavy in the air like an accusation. "We need to time this perfectly." "Aegis, status on storm eye formation," Lyra requested, her voice perfectly balanced between bored and mildly interested. "Eye formation in approximately 15 minutes, Aegis chirped, its synthetic tones as emotionless as a mannequin's stare. "Guess that's our cue," Sierra said, joining the fray with a toolkit that looked more suited for medieval dentistry than space-age repairs. "Do we get a curtain call, or is this a one-and-done show?" Rook asked, his dark humor a constant companion. Cassian shrugged. "Depends on how many rotten tomatoes get thrown our way." They worked in a tense silence punctuated only by the storm's fury and the occasional sarcastic barb. Cassian felt sweat trickle down his neck, each drop a reminder that they were racing against the clock, their very survival hanging by a thread. "That storm is getting closer," Rook pointed out, as if anyone needed the reminder. "One wrong move and we're toast." "Burnt to a crisp," Sierra agreed, her eyes never leaving her work. "Guess we'll all be joining the great cosmic barbecue." "Not my preferred way to go," Cassian admitted, fingers flying across the controls. "Yeah, how'd you want to go out then?" Rook asked, a grin tugging at his lips. "Old age surrounded by luxury and with a drink in hand," Cassian replied, a wry glint in his eye. "Dream big, Doc," Sierra said, her laugh a sharp, brittle thing. Lyra's eyes flicked up from her console. "You know, I'm starting to think we're the universe's answer to comic relief. More like the punchline," Cassian said dryly. "Why else would I be stuck on Europa with you lot?" The team shared a brief chuckle, a tiny island of camaraderie in the sea of impending doom. It was a reminder that even in the darkest times, they could still find light in each other. "Power reallocation complete," Rook announced, wiping sweat from his brow. "We've got just enough juice to try this insane stunt." Cassian nodded, satisfaction mixing with anxiety in his gut. "All right, everyone, this is it. We're going to try the backup protocol during the eye of the storm. Nothing like trying to defuse a bomb in the middle of a hurricane," Sierra muttered, shaking her head. "I always did love a challenge," Lyra said, her voice a dry whisper of irony. Cassian tapped his comms. "Aegis, initiate synchronization sequence upon my mark." "Sequence ready," Aegis replied, as helpful as a butler holding open the door to certain doom. Cassian took a deep breath, the weight of their mission pressing heavy on his shoulders. "Prepare for system synchronization," he instructed, his voice steady despite the chaos. "This is what we've been training for." "Training," Rook laughed. "Feels more like improv with a side of desperation." "Let's just hope we're good at it," Cassian replied, checking his systems one last time. The storm battered the dome with renewed vigor, each gust a reminder of their precarious situation. Cassian felt the ground tremble beneath his feet, and for a moment he wondered if this was how the end would come, a slow, torturous march to oblivion. 5 minutes until the eye, Lyra reported, her fingers a blur over the console. "Right," Cassian said, his voice firm. "Let's do this, everyone in position." "Aye, aye, Captain," Sierra replied, her sarcasm a lifeline. "Just tell us when to jump," Rook added. "I've got my best acrobatics ready." Cassian nodded, his mind a whirlwind of calculations and contingencies. "On my mark, 3, 2, 1, mark." The team sprang into action, their movements a synchronized dance of survival. Cassian felt the tension ratchet up another notch, their every action a calculated risk. "Initiating backup protocol," Lyra announced, her voice a beacon of calm in the storm. Cassian watched as lights flared to life across the console, a symphony of technology working in harmony, or at least trying to. The storm outside roared its defiance, a beast unwilling to be tamed. "Og, the power's fluctuating," Rook called out, his hands frantically adjusting settings. "It's like trying to keep a drunkard upright." Steady, Rook, Cashin urged, his own fingers flying over controls. We've got this, let's hope the universe agrees, Lyra said, her eyes never leaving the data streaming across her screen. The tension in the room was palpable, each second crawling by with agonizing slowness. Cashin felt his heart pounding in his chest, a relentless drumbeat of fear and determination. Synchronization at 75%, Aegis reported, its voice a lifeline amidst the chaos. Come on, Sierra muttered, her eyes locked on her monitor. Just a little more. The storm's fury abated for a brief moment, a pause in the cosmic symphony's relentless crescendo. Cashin knew this was their shot, a last desperate gambit to avert disaster. Push it, he ordered, his voice slicing through the tension like a knife. Synchronizing. Now, Lyra said, tapping a final command into her console. The room held its breath, each team member frozen in anticipation. Cashin watched the screen, the numbers dancing in a chaotic ballet, each one a step closer to salvation or ruin. Synchronization achieved, Aegis declared, its voice a calm amidst the storm. Backup protocol engaged. Cashin exhaled, the tension in his shoulders easing by a fraction. We did it, for now, Sierra cautioned, her smile a brittle thing. Let's not count our chickens, or whatever's left of them, Rook added, his grin a flash of dark humor. Lyra nodded, her eyes scanning the data. Backup protocol stable. We've bought ourselves some time. How much time? Cashin asked, his mind already racing through the next steps. Hard to say, Lyra replied, her gaze shifting to the storm still raging outside. But it's better than nothing. Nothing's what we had before, Rook pointed out, his voice carrying a note of grim satisfaction. Cashin allowed himself a brief moment of relief, the weight of their victory a tenuous thing. They'd managed to pull off the impossible, but the fight was far from over. Keep monitoring the weapon, he instructed, turning his attention back to the console. We need to be ready for whatever comes next. Let's just hope that next isn't the end of us, Sierra said, her tone a mix of humor and resignation. Cashin nodded, his determination renewed. Whatever it is, we'll face it together. That's what we do, the storm outside roared its defiance, but Cashin knew they'd won a temporary reprieve in their battle against the universe's indifference. It wasn't much, but it was enough to keep fighting. All right, team, he said, his voice a rallying cry. Let's get ready. You've got a world to save, and I'm not about to let it slip through our fingers. They shared a collective nod, the bond forged by adversity a steadfast anchor in the sea of uncertainty. As far as Cashin was concerned, they had all the time in the world, or at least enough to try again. The storm's eye passed overhead, a brief respite in the maelstrom, and Cashin felt a flicker of hope stir within him. Maybe, just maybe, they could pull off the impossible one more time. After all, they were only human, and in this corner of the galaxy, that was more than enough. Cashin Nadir rubbed his temples, feeling like he'd sooner pull a rabbit out of his hat than make sense of this mess. All right, folks, he said, scanning the room of faces that had somehow become his motley crew. We've got a storm lull, a brief chance to pry open this Pandora's box and hope it doesn't slap us with global annihilation. Sierra shrugged, her toolkit clanking like an old-timey dentist's nightmare as she moved. So, a normal day at the office then? Exactly, Cashin replied. If your office had a view of an impending apocalypse. Rook was still elbow-deep in wires, his hands a blur of motion. I've seen better vacation spots. Less rain, fewer chances of dying horribly. Europa, come for the breathtaking views, stay for the existential dread, Lyra added, her lips curling into a sardonic smile. Cashin glanced at the console, the flickering lights like angry fireflies. Let's focus, people. We've got systems to synchronize and a superweapon to defuse. No pressure, Aegis, ever the monotone butler of doom, chimed in. Targeting protocol disengaged in T-10 minutes. Great, Rook muttered. Plenty of time for a quick game of poker. Lyra was already tapping away at her console, eyes flicking between the screens like a virtuoso playing a symphony only she could hear. Aegis, initiate data stream to the weapon's core interface. Let's see if this antique tech still knows how to tango. Initiating stream, Aegis replied, as helpful as a binary bouncer. Cashin's mind ran through the plan for the umpteenth time, trying to find the holes before they swallowed them all. Sierra, if we hit any snags, I need you on damage control. I'll be the one holding the duct tape and prayers, she said, her voice as dry as Europa's humor. Cashin turned to Lyra. We need to bypass the security protocols without triggering any nasty surprises. Think you can manage? Lyra raised an eyebrow, the gesture an eloquent mix of challenge and amusement. If I can't, we're all screwed anyway, so, no pressure, right? Right, Cashin replied, a hint of a smile tugging at his lips. Let's get to it, the storm outside had paused, as if holding its breath for the cosmic comedy unfolding below. Cashin could almost taste the tension in the air, a bitter cocktail of fear and hope. Data stream confirmed, Aegis announced, its voice slicing through the silence like a foe daring them to flinch. All right, here goes nothing, Rook said, twisting a handful of wires with the practiced ease of a man defusing a bomb. Wish me luck, luck's for the unprepared, Cashin muttered, though he suspected Rook had a direct line to Lady Luck herself. The room was a hive of activity, each team member a cog in the precarious machine of their salvation. Cashin watched as Lyra's fingers danced over her console, her movements precise, deliberate. Accessing weapon core, Lyra announced, her voice calm yet focused. Systems responding. For now, Sierra echoed, her voice carrying the weight of too many close calls and not enough happy endings. Cashin felt his heartbeat quicken, the stakes higher than any gamble he'd ever made. Rook, how's it looking? Rook glanced up, his grin a flash of white in the dim light. We've got a green light, Doc. Systems are holding steady. Let's keep it that way, Cashin replied, trying to ignore the knot in his stomach. Security protocols bypassed, Lyra said, her tone one of quiet triumph. We're in, Cashin nodded, relief barely having a chance to settle before anxiety took its place. Good, now let's make sure this thing stays asleep. The console's lights pulsed gently, an eerie calm in the eye of the storm. Cashin knew they were walking a tightrope over a pit of annihilation, and one wrong move could send them tumbling into the abyss. Initiate shutdown sequence, Cashin ordered, his voice steady despite the chaos of his thoughts. And pray this old tech doesn't have a mind of its own. Lyra's hands flew over the interface, her focus unbreakable. Shutdown sequence initiated, transferring control to manual override. Cashin held his breath, each second a small eternity. The room seemed to shrink around him, the walls closing in as they waited for a sign, any sign that they'd succeeded. Manual override engaged, Aegis confirmed, its mechanical tones as reassuring as a snake oil salesman. A collective sigh of relief rippled through the team, the tension in the room easing but not evaporating completely. Cashin felt the weight on his shoulders lift, if only slightly. Targeting system neutralized, Lyra announced, the words a bomb on strained nerves. We did it, Rook whooped, the sound echoing off the walls. Take that, Universe, we're not your punchline today. Not today, Sierra agreed, her smile one of hard-won victory. Cashin allowed himself a moment to savor the triumph, the knowledge that they'd snatched victory from the jaws of disaster. All right, team. Let's secure this thing and get the hell out of here before the storm decides to throw a tantrum. Lyra's fingers danced across the console, securing their hard-won gains. Now we just need to make sure this thing stays down. Like a stubborn drunk at last call, Rook added, his humor a welcome relief. Cashin nodded, the sense of urgency reasserting itself. Let's hustle. I'd rather not ride out another storm unless we have to. They moved with purpose, securing systems and powering down equipment. Cashin felt the adrenaline fade, leaving behind a bone-deep exhaustion that he knew all too well. Europa didn't kill us this time, Lyra said, her voice a mix of disbelief and relief. Cashin chuckled, weary but grateful. I'd call that a win. Let's not tempt fate by sticking around. Agreed, Sierra chimed in, her tone light despite the weight of their ordeal. I've had enough excitement for a lifetime. Cashin led the way back to their transport, the distant rumble of the storm a reminder of how close they'd come to disaster. But for now, they'd won. For now, they'd pulled off the impossible. As they boarded the pod, Cashin felt a swell of pride in his team. They'd faced the universe's indifference and come out the other side, scarred but unbroken. All right, folks, he said, settling into his seat. Let's head home and see if Earth's still there to greet us. Home, Rook echoed, the word a promise and a hope. Cashin knew their victory was tenuous, fragile as a whisper in the void, but it was enough. Enough to fight another day, enough to keep believing in the impossible. The pod's engines roared to life, the promise of safety and stability waiting somewhere beyond the storm. Cashin felt the tension ease from his muscles, the knowledge of their success a soothing balm. Europa, Lyra said, her voice carrying a touch of fondness despite the trials they'd faced. We'll see you again, I'm sure. Next time, Sierra added with a wry grin, let's hope for better weather. Cashin chuckled, the sound light and free, a reminder that even in the bleakest of circumstances they could still find a sliver of light. Next time, he agreed, let's hope the universe cuts us some slack. The pod rose steadily, the storm's fury fading into the distance as they ascended. Cashin looked around at his crew, their faces a tapestry of relief and determination. They'd done it. Against all odds, they'd faced down the storm and the specter of annihilation, and they'd won. For now, Cashin knew the universe had a penchant for throwing curveballs, but for the moment he was content to savor their victory. They'd lived to fight another day, and for this ragtag team of misfits, that was enough. As they journeyed away from Europa, Cashin felt a flicker of hope stir within him, a fragile thing but real nonetheless. Maybe, just maybe, they could continue defying the odds, and as far as Cashin was concerned, that was the best kind of victory, one wrested from the jaws of chaos, a testament to their resilience and their refusal to quit. They were only human after all. And sometimes that was more than enough to change the stars. The pod hummed softly as it sliced through the inky abyss, the stormy wrath of Europa fading into the rearview like a bad dream. Cassian Nadir leaned back, feeling the tension seeping out of his bones as the pod found its rhythm through space. For a moment, he let himself believe they'd actually pulled it off. "Hey, Cassian," Rook piped up from across the cabin, his voice carrying a lilt of incredulity. "Did we really just save the world, or is this one of those fever dreams where I wake up missing an arm and half my sanity?" Cassian smirked, the corners of his mouth twitching with amusement. "If it's a dream, I'd like to file a complaint about the catering. I didn't even get a lousy sandwich out of this ordeal." Well, Sierra interjected, fiddling with her toolkit like it was a Rubik's Cube of impending doom. "At least you got to keep both arms and all your charming pessimism." "Charming, huh?" Cassian shot back, his tone as dry as the dust coating Europa's surface. "I'll take that as a win." Lyra, her fingers still unconsciously drumming against the console, glanced up. "We did it against Europa's best attempts to make us its latest victims. I'd say we earned a little self-congratulation, or perhaps a medal," Rook suggested, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Or a mug that says I defused a superweapon, and all I got was this lousy mug." The laughter that followed was the kind of release only survivors could truly appreciate, a shared acknowledgement of their shared absurdity and their shared victory over the universe's worst day planner. Dr. Nadir, watching the camaraderie unfold, felt a rare warmth in his chest. Not the kind that signaled a heart attack, thankfully, but one that came from knowing they'd forged something strong in the fires of their shared misadventure. A bond, maybe, a ragtag family formed under the most improbable of circumstances. "Aegis," Cassian called, addressing the AI with the same begrudging respect he'd given old adversary. "Status report, communication with Earth restored," Aegis droned, its monotone delivery about as exciting as watching paint dry. "Transmission awaiting your response. Earth calling us back so soon?" Sierra asked, her voice laced with mock surprise. "I was hoping for at least a week before they found us another death trap to conquer," Cassian chuckled. "Duty calls, Sierra. And apparently it's got our number on speed dial." He hit the comm switch, the connection crackling to life with all the finesse of a coffee grinder in need of oil. "Dr. Nadir here, status. Not dead, despite Europa's best efforts." A voice crackled back, one Cassian recognized as Mission Control's chief stick-in-the-mud, Director Patel. "Dr. Nadir, it's good to hear your voice. I assume from the lack of screams that the mission was a success." Cassian allowed himself a wry grin. "Unless you're receiving this from an apocalyptic wasteland, then yeah, I'd call it a success. Tell the bean counters they can stop worrying about the superweapon destroying Earth. We've put it to bed. Excellent work, Doctor. Earth will sleep easier tonight thanks to you and your team," Patel replied, his voice carrying the kind of relief that came with narrowly avoiding a planetary headline in the obituaries. "We'll celebrate as soon as we get home," Cassian said, though he imagined their idea of celebration might just involve a long, uninterrupted nap. "Copy that. We'll have a debrief ready for you upon return," Patel concluded, the line closing with a definitive click. Cassian turned back to his team, their expressions a tapestry of relief and exhaustion. "Looks like we've got a date with Earth and all the red tape it can throw at us." Sierra raised an eyebrow. "Great. I love spending my hard-earned post-apocalyptic peace signing forms in triplicate. It's the least we can do for saving humanity," Rook quipped. "Fill out some paperwork and maybe get our parking validated." Cassian settled back into his seat, the soft hum of the engines lulling him into a rare moment of introspection. They'd come so close to failing, to joining the countless other relics left adrift in space. But they hadn't. Against the odds, they'd succeeded. "Hey," Lyra's voice cut through his thoughts. "Do you think what we found changes anything?" Cassian considered the question, the weight of the implications settling on his shoulders. Discovering a superweapon doesn't exactly inspire warm and fuzzy feelings. It's a reminder that the universe has its fair share of boogeymen, or that we're just too damn good at finding them," Sierra added, her tone wry. "That too," Cassian agreed, "but maybe it means we're also good at stopping them. We're still standing after all." Rook grinned, the expression full of a kind of reckless optimism that Cassian found oddly infectious. "If we can take on a superweapon and win, what's next?" "Arm wrestling an asteroid. Let's not get ahead of ourselves," Cassian replied, though the idea of defying even more cosmic odds didn't seem as daunting with this crew by his side. "We've earned a little peace before we start hunting down the next disaster." The pod continued its journey, the promise of home, a place with fewer existential threats, at least for now, drawing ever closer. Cassian found himself looking forward to it more than he cared to admit. As the familiar blue-green marble of Earth came into view, a sense of accomplishment washed over him. They'd done it. They'd faced down the darkness and emerged victorious, their bonds stronger for the trials they'd endured. "Look at that," Sierra said, nodding toward the planet growing larger on the view screen. Home sweet home, Cashin smiled, the sight filling him with a sense of belonging he hadn't realized he'd missed. Yeah, home. They descended through the atmosphere, the pod shuddering slightly as it met the familiar resistance of gravity, a reminder that despite their time among the stars, this was where they belonged. As they touched down, the sense of finality was palpable, a shared acknowledgement of their journey's end and the paths it had opened for them. They'd saved Earth, but more than that, they'd found something worth holding onto. Cashin stood, feeling the weight of their success and the promise of the future settling over him like a mantle. All right, team. Let's go face the music. They exited the pod, the harsh lights of the landing bay a stark contrast to the dim confines of their spacecraft. Cashin led the way, his heart a mixture of pride and gratitude as he looked back at the team that had made this all possible. Cashin, Lyra called, her voice tinged with a warmth that belied her usual sarcasm. Thanks for not getting us all killed, he chuckled, the sound full of genuine amusement. I'd thank you back, but I think it was a group effort. Either way, drinks are on you, Rook declared, his grin as bright as the bay's overhead lights. Cashin nodded, feeling the first stirrings of hope for the future. Deal. Just as soon as we're done with the red tape, together they walked toward whatever waited beyond those sliding doors, a team forged in the fires of chaos and tempered by their shared resolve. They'd faced the universe's worst and lived to tell the tale. As they disappeared into the debrief, Cashin couldn't help but think that, for this ragtag crew, the stars were still theirs for the taking. And as far as cosmic punchlines went, he'd call that a win.